Hello, and welcome to our webinar featuring a practical guide to disaggregated networks. I'm Kelly LeBlanc, and I'm the Chief Marketing and Product Officer at IP Infusion. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. You can ask any of your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll either get back to you during the webinar or directly following, depending on the time. Today, I'm joined by two very special guests. First, I would like to introduce you to Howard Holton at GigaOm. Howard, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm the CTO at GigaOm. I've been here about 15 months, 16 months. Before that, I was the CIO and CISO for a global industrial manufacturing company. I was the CTO of Hitachi Vantara before that, CIO and CISO for a legal services company. Retail, automotive, telecom, healthcare. I've been in the executive suite for 17 years at this point and 35 years in IT overall. I wrote and sold my first piece of commercial software when I was 11 and became my school district's largest non-construction contractor while I was still in high school. So it's kind of how I got my start, and it's continued since then. I spend most of my time at GigaOm working with our customers, right? We're an analyst organization, so our customers are vendors and end user organizations. With vendors, I focus on how to better reach the buyer. With my end user organizations, it's really about strategy and taking IT strategy or data strategy or security strategy and developing an execution plan around that. Setting up milestones and checkpoints to make sure that those things are successful.
Excellent, thank you, Howard. And next, I would like to introduce you to Randy Horn at Vyve Broadband. Randy, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Kelly. Randy Horn, Vice President, Network Engineering at Vyve Broadband. Been in the cable MSO industry for over 20 years. Bounced between both the vendor and customer side, so working directly with cable companies. And also I was with Cisco for several years in an engineering role. Also have been over at the telecom side as well, working with at Lumen in an engineering role. So been around for a little while, love the cable industry, and really excited to talk about network disaggregation.
Thank you, Randy. All right. Thank you both. And before we begin our discussion, I would like to introduce briefly why the three of us are together to talk today about a practical guide to disaggregated networks. So for some background, IP Infusion is a provider of network disaggregation with our network operating system, which is called Oknos. Oknos offers an alternative to legacy equipment with end-to-end use cases for access, aggregation, transport, and all the way to the data center with the same Oknos software. There are several key drivers of trends in disaggregation that are allowing us to be successful right now. The first is supply chain diversification. We give you your choice of hardware. The second is open standards, which is increasingly important for interoperability. And the third is that we've now closed the performance gap versus legacy equipment with our Oknos software that can run up to terabit scale. So who are the biggest and most important vendors in the NOS market space right now? Let's have a look. Over to you, Howard.
Yes. So this is what we call our radar graphic. So GigaOm is an analyst organization. If you were to think of us like Gartner, I would not be offended. If you've never heard of us, I'm also not offended. We are relatively small, but we are a team of engineers and practitioners working in the space to really help to analyze the space and bring value to our customers, the end users. And we do that with a product that looks like this. If you see this and you think, oh, this looks a bit like a magic quadrant, you're not terribly wrong. We call this our radar, where the best positions are closest to the center. And the quadrants that we have defined really help customers to determine where they should buy from and then who to buy from. The goal isn't to say who's the best, but rather who you should invite into the room to have a conversation with, who would be wisest to have a conversation with. And there are two kind of big things to look at outside of the quadrant. The first is distance from the center. And so you can see Arcus, Nokia, DriveNets, and IP Infusion are closest to the center for this. And then the other one is the color of the arrow. The color of the arrow defines the speed at which we expect them to move, reflective of the pace of the market. So the dark blue is kind of moving with the evolution of the market and maturity of the market. The orange is moving faster and the blue is moving slower, right? And so we expect the 4 in orange to continue to move and keep pace or beat the pace of the market in continuing to evolve the platform. So were I making a decision today and were I advising a customer, my advice would be pick the quadrant, start with the oranges and then the dark blues, who are closest to the center. And you can see IP Infusion with OCNOS is hard to beat in our opinion.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Howard. And so continuing our introduction, let's have a look at our NOS in action at Vyve Broadband. Over to you, Randy.
Thanks, Kelly. So Vyve Broadband is a cable company that's actually comprised of 3 cable companies brought together through mergers and acquisitions, deploying the IP Infusion, ultimately deploying IP Infusion, and I'll talk about how we got to that decision. The IP Infusion ag routers that we have in place, they combine voice, video, and data traffic, so they're aggregation routers for all of our services. By the end of this year, we should have around 200 OCNOS boxes deployed to replace our legacy network equipment. And then we were fortunate enough to get with an integrator, RockNet Supply, and they really helped us accelerate the deployment of our IP Infusion solution, and with testing and deployment, also with some engineering support. And then, like I said, there was 3 separate cable companies brought together to form one cable company, also looking to form one network. So we were able to consolidate our disparate infrastructure. And then with that, we also got a increase in network stability and saw our call center volume drop. So I'll get more into that as well as we move through the webinar.
Right. Thank you, Randy. So let's get started with a discussion with our special guests, and we'll keep this discussion going. And my first question is for Howard. Howard, what are some of the big opportunities that NOS vendors might be able to capitalize on right now? For example, hardware needing upgraded software, greenfield, brownfield deployments, etc.
So I think there's a ton of opportunity in the space right now. And if I'm being honest, the opportunity isn't new. It just every year becomes more and more pressing, right? Historically, when we manage networks, we kind of managed our network. And we kind of thought of the world as that which was contained within our network. Today, our network may have gone from, at a prior organization, I had 22 different locations, right? So I had a network that was basically 22 components of a hub and spoke, if you thought about it in a very traditional way. Today, right, because of the cloud, because of work from home, because of the remote worker, I probably have 500 networks that I manage. I probably went from having an on-network, off-network network consideration to having 500 to 1,000 different network considerations. When I layer that on top of the complexity of managing the cloud network and how the cloud network operates and how that needs to integrate with all of my use cases, including kind of thinking of the cloud as a data center connection, which is not really the right way to think about it, but I still have to enable those connections to those things that I provide to customers. Doing that by managing a bunch of individual devices doesn't really play well, right? And what we really need to start doing is thinking about those as more of a cohesive virtual environment where I think about ports as a whole, where I think about connections as a whole, where I think about configuration as one holistic object that I manage, and then I manage them more like a city rather than more like a home. And so it's never been a better time to look at it. If you have devices that are aging or aged out, and you can replace those with a piece of hardware that is a little dumber and software that is much, much smarter, the ability to simply do more with the same is increased to a point that we've never had before. And the capabilities contained within disaggregated network software can be applied across your network, not to the isolated places where those capabilities were available before. I'm not going to say there were necessarily more capabilities, but the capabilities are more kind of baked in across the operating system. And so your ability to deliver the capability to the exact point that it needs to be, manage it holistically, manage it centrally, has never existed in the way that it did before today. Then there's this little thing that happened a couple years ago. I'm certain everybody has forgotten, right? I don't remember who won the World Series last year. I live in Colorado and constantly forget that I think we championed in basketball and maybe something else. But there was this thing called COVID that happened a couple years ago. I know everybody's forgotten. And along with it came some supply chain issues. And those supply chain issues meant I couldn't necessarily get my preferred vendor's hardware on the floor. So now I'm managing 1 or 2 or 3 different networking systems that I may or may not want to. And that one of the huge advantages to disaggregation is the hardware and software are separate. And so I can, in fact, use a heterogeneous supply chain, right? Get my hardware from multiple vendors so I can mitigate those supply chain concerns in the future, and yet still manage them all using the same software layer. It's hugely advantageous for customers, and I strongly encourage anyone that hasn't started looking at it and isn't looking at deploying it in your organization, at least look at it and understand the capabilities that you have kind of at your fingertips with a good disaggregation strategy.
Oh, that's great. Great recommendation, Howard. And it reminds me of our discussions with Randy as he's been going through his network disaggregation journey for quite some time. So let's hand it over to Randy. Randy, please tell us about your network disaggregation journey and why you selected IP Infusion's Oknos.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me set the stage a little bit first. Like I'd mentioned, Vyve Broadband is comprised of 3 separate cable MSOs, and those were brought together through mergers and acquisitions. The goal was to take these 3 separate MSOs with the 3 separate networks, and these networks were very different vendors, different strategy, different architectures, and bring those all together into one cohesive network. So with that being said, when I stepped into the role, there was a previous attempt at doing white box and NOS. And while it was operating in the network, it was starting to run into some scale issues. We were starting to see some operations issues on that platform. And then we had some feature disparities. So there was a gap there on where we wanted to go, what we needed to do, and what was available from a NOS perspective using the current NOS. So we had to make some decisions. On top of everything, it's 2021 and we can't get equipment. To Howard's point, it was extremely hard to get 100 gig base ports and equipment shipped out in a timely manner. It was 8 months, a year on the lead times. So we had a lot of challenges sitting in front of us, and we really had to take a good strong look at what the options were and what we could do that was going to get us over the finish line. So I'd been keeping up with Whitebox and various NOS since about 2015. I got interested in something called Project Onos, and they had an internal project called Cord, which is central office re-architected as data center. So I've been kind of watching that since about 2015. And there had been some progress, but it was really kind of dev heavy and student projects within universities and things like that of building a NOS and setting it on a white box. And there wasn't anything that was solid from that perspective. So fast forward a couple years, 2018, AT&T announces they're going to do white box core. And so I started following the AT&T story throughout. And now it's 2021 and I have to start looking, and I thought, well, let's look at white box and NOS. Maybe it's advanced to the point where this has become something that we can put out in mass scale. And in doing that, we investigated 3 different, we were investigating the 3 different networks that we had brought together. None of them were going to scale up to what we needed. They didn't have the feature sets needed to take it across the finish line. And again, it was all very different vendors, different architectures, different strategies. So we were basically starting from scratch. doing research, our list came down to 5 NOS contenders. 2 of them are network operating systems produced by the large router manufacturers as a version of their OS, put out to open source, and then provided to the community to work with and deploy. These were put out, and I didn't see a whole lot of options for support. I mean, they were like side projects. It seemed to me like they were like side projects. So if you're going to get a support or a feature, it was mostly forum-based, community-based. You had to go request, you had to look around quite a bit, and it didn't seem like they were keeping up with releases and dev and things like that on these certain platforms. One of them that we looked at was extremely dev heavy. You were basically going in and coding on the NOS. You were coding against the chipsets to get things how you wanted. That's not what the engineering department that we have is about, right? We don't have a dev heavy engineering department for network engineering. So that one didn't seem like it was a good option for us. We did test it. It did work. But again, we had to do quite a bit of light dev work just to even get it to work. So we're looking for something out of the box. We need something out of the box that's going to work for us. That brought us to 2 final contenders, one of those being IP Infusion. During this time, I'm also trying to source gear, and we have a partner, RockNet Supply, that I called up and I started asking about white boxes, about Edge Core, essentially, and the 5912 series. What we had in the network was the 7712 series, and that was more of a data center based white box. So we knew that we had to move to a more service provider routed chipset white box, and the 5912 seemed to fit that bill from both a port density standpoint and a processing standpoint. When I was talking to RockNet, I mentioned IP Infusion, and to my surprise, they said, "Oh yeah, IP Infusion. We resell that all the time. We have several customers using it. We have an engineer that is able to that is very well versed in it. We have a lab set up with. We have IP Infusion in." So that was more of a stroke of luck, really, for us. Is we got to a partner of ours that was already very well educated in OCNOS and being able to help us out. So within a week, after that call, within a week, we had a call set up with IP Infusion business and engineering leadership to ask any questions we wanted. We also had a lab that we had access to. We had an engineer that was familiar with IP Infusion that we had access to. So we were able to kind of get in and really start poking at this thing almost day one. So we got in, we got this all set up. We looked at all the feature sets. I had a lot of fears because it was new. It was not the big monolithic routers that I was been used to for the last 20 plus years. And this was new territory for us. So a little nervous on it. When I got access to the lab and I hopped into OCNOS and started driving around a little bit, it was very familiar. I mean, it's a very Cisco-like CLI, and I was able to really start doing a lot of the operational things early, from the aspect of setting up BGP, creating pseudo wires, creating access lists. So it wasn't a big learning curve. Operationally, it was extremely similar to what network engineering has been for a long time. So that was a load off my shoulders, because I thought, well, we're going to have to go in and we're going to have to reteach everybody everything about CLI. Everybody's going to have to learn a new CLI. They didn't. So that was a relief. And then, going through a couple other pieces we looked at, it was starting to perform, the performance of it was the other big aspect, right? So as we went through, we had RockNet with an engineer that they devoted to helping us get through the testing. And we were able to get the testing done in about 3 months. We had about 1,000 hours of test for both feature and function, was about 350 hours. So that was just, as BGP come up? Is it trading routes? The interfaces talk correctly? So on and so forth. Then we had about another 750 hours of taking our specific architecture and strategy, loading it into a lab design, having packet generators and load testers pushing packets through and getting the results out. And we ran into very little problems. It was one of the, and I'll talk about this, but it was kind of shocking to me how little of issues we had running through our lab testing. It went very fast. We came out of it very comfortable. And then from an operations perspective, like I said, it was like, it's very familiar with the CLI. So from the operations perspective, it wasn't a big learning curve. The box reacted like and drove just like the routers that we had been dealing with for 20 plus years. So everything coming out of the test was very comfortable. And that's when I thought, okay, this is it. This router, you load the NOS on, it's a little bit different, but basically the same steps. You get into the router, it's very comfortable, it's very familiar, and it seems like it's working very well. And that's what did it for us. We thought I don't think we're going to find a better contender here. And we went with IP Infusion.
Oh, that's excellent, Randy. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. In fact, it's a good time to start with the poll question so we can get some feedback from the audience. So let's have a look at our first poll question. All right, for those of you who are listening, are you, your company or organization or anyone you know evaluating network disaggregation as an infrastructure strategy? Yes or no? Everyone could have a quick vote here. I think we've given everyone enough time to vote. Let's have a look. Well, looks, there it is. Okay, well, here are the responses so far. As we probably could have imagined, we have the majority of the folks who know someone or who are currently evaluating network disaggregation. All right, thank you. All right, so let's get back to our discussion.
I really like that that's not a 90-10, to be honest, right? Because I do think, like I said, this is a topic we should all be thinking about at this point. And if it was 90%, we're already thinking about it, and 10% no, versus the kind of 2/3, 1/3, I think we'd be in a worse position. I think this is a very good position for everybody to be in.
Well, that's good news, Howard. Let's go on and continue that discussion. So in that vein, what do you think NOS vendors need to do to remain competitive right now against legacy equipment?
Ease of use. And what I mean by ease of use is not just make the interfaces that are new and unique easy to use, but make it as familiar as possible, knowing we've been managing networks for a very, very, very long time. It's likely we've already invested in technologies. It's like we've already invested in languages and ways of working. And so the more compatible those languages and ways of working are, the more familiar the operating system feels, the faster and more successful we'll be in the deployments. It's by far the biggest thing. And then have a really good understanding of the economics of how all this works, and make the licensing and support, because a lot of it's open source, right? So the licensing and support, easy to understand and easy to kind of calculate and estimate. Those are the two biggest things that I would say NOS vendors need to do to remain competitive. All of the kind of new technology adoption, NOS vendors are very, very, very good at, but those are the two that I think are the most important in kind of making that transition.
All right, excellent. So let's go back to Randy on this. When you were going through the design, what did you expect the biggest challenge to be? And then when you were going through the deployment, what did you expect the biggest challenge to be? And were these things the same or different?
So they were very different. Going through the design, and I'm going to go back to the test and feature function. That's where I thought the biggest challenge was going to be, was in testing feature, function, and interop. There's a matrix that OCNOS has of its features and functions, and it's pretty large. It covers, it can cover quite a bit. From the service provider's perspective, it had everything that we needed. And when we got into the lab, We also had monolithic routers set up that we currently have in our network, and we had to go interop against a variety of different gear. I thought we were gonna be struggling in that. I thought we were gonna have to be there's gonna be a lot of dev work on IP Infusion side, and that wasn't the case at all. The interop was actually really easy, because as I kind of found out, Oknos follows RFC specs to the T. There's some interpretations in those sometimes, but really they follow the RFC spec very well. And so when we got to interop, as long as the other vendor was following RFC spec, it really, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal at all. When we started deploying this, one of the biggest challenges we had was that we modeled it out and we did our bandwidth calculations, and did like a 5-year model for this particular architecture, knowing that when COVID started to subside and people started to go back to work and things like that, the bandwidth was going to die down. We had a huge boom in sales because everybody was at home during COVID. So everybody got cable internet, and there was a huge boom in sales and upgrades. We figured that was going to start to dwindle down. And it didn't, right? So hats off to the Vyve, sales and marketing organization. They kept that momentum going, and Vyve was growing at a tremendous rate. So where we had modeled out to a 5-year, it started to reduce down to a 4-year, and then a 3-year. So we were standing up new circuits all the time. We were still tying everything together, and mind you, we have to keep all this, the legacy stuff still running. So the way that we really kind of accomplish that is to build the Oknos network on top, deploy it on MPLS, and get pseudo wires set up to keep the legacy gear still connected, virtually connected, but really run the routing up at the Oknos layer, and then go ahead and start transitioning all the services over. The transitions were easy. We got to take a lot of bandwidth off the legacy networks very quickly. And so, it was just, I'm still kind of amazed. I don't know how to properly describe how well operationally and testing went, and how easy it kind of was. It's like the monolithic days, except now I have all these choices, and I can put whatever I want on. And I took that installed base that we had. So as I had mentioned before, we had that previous NOS installation on Whitebox that wasn't doing so hot. So I got to put Oknos on those, and those all of a sudden became routers that are part of the network that have everything that we want. Which, to get the other engineers, the regional engineers and other IP engineers to understand that this box that we've been having kind of problems with, you're going to come in one day and it's not going to be that box anymore. It's going to be a totally different type of router. It's going to have all these new features. It's going to look the exact same. You haven't touched anything, by the way, but the next day when you come in, it's going to be MPLS capable, segment routing capable. It's going to be it's going to have a layer 3 QoS capabilities. It's going to have all these new capabilities. So when you get into it, and by the way, it's not going to be that CLI that you're really unfamiliar with and is kind of cumbersome. It's going to be a Cisco like CLI. So when you pop in to this box tomorrow, you're going to be able to drive it around like you've been driving around boxes for the last 20 years. So, those were all the reliefs. Our biggest challenge at the end of the day was keeping up with demand. Once this thing started to perform, once we got the Oknos out there, everybody wanted it in their part of the network, and we couldn't get boxes through RockNet. We got like 20 more boxes for the year that we're able to put in and deploy out. Our strategy was to get them into some of the aggregation points, start diminishing blast radiuses, things like that. So it really worked out well for us, and we had a good problem. The biggest challenge for us on this at the end of the day was a good challenge. We had to get more boxes out to meet the demand of the growth of the business.
Right. We like it when the biggest challenge is a good challenge.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good segue into our next poll question. So let's fire that up. So for those of you who are listening, I'll read it. In your opinion, what is the best aspect of open networking and network disaggregation? Is it cost, features, interoperability, or freedom of choice? Okay, so thanks to all who have voted. Let's have a look. All right, interesting. So over 50% freedom of choice. Howard, what do you think about this?
That was my vote, right? My vote was freedom of choice because, well, I think we all got hit by that supply chain problem, right? And Randy's story is incredible. This is the second time I've heard it, right? Going through this, and it knocks me back how detailed his experience is. And yet at the same time, no matter how large or how small you are, you were affected by supply chain issues. And so I think that freedom of choice is becoming more and more and more important as we move forward. So I'm not surprised, and I'm happy to see that as the selection. I don't think the other ones are things to ignore or things to set too far behind. Like I think it's a fairly close race. Right, cost, interoperability, performance, these things are all at some point they're table stakes, right? My network has to have a high level of interoperability. My networking cannot be the costs on networking cannot change effectively, and performance is kind of an accepted must have. But when it really comes to kind of differentiation is nothing can have the freedom of choice that a disaggregated network solution can.
Yeah, that's Howard. I'm curious, what do you suggest are some pitfalls to look out for with potential disaggregation strategies?
Trying to do it all at once, I think, would be one. Right. I think just like anything else, right? You need a good architecture and design. I would plan on spending 3 times the amount of time you think you should spend on architecture and design. Most of the time, the pitfalls that I see come from not having those things firmly kind of buttoned down. I don't think network architecture and design is a good place for agile methodologies. In other words, right? Fixing it in production is probably not what I want to hear when I roll out a new networking platform. Really understand the capabilities of the vendor that you've selected, kind of their maturity, their priorities, where their investment lies within network disaggregation, and what their partner network looks like, right? At the same time, I think when you start looking at these things, the partner that you choose becomes really, really important. Randy talked about the networking partner that he had for the hardware was also an IP Infusion OCNOS partner, and was very familiar. And having the ability to build, buy, or borrow as choices, because you've looked at your ecosystem, and you can build it yourself, you can borrow it, as in leverage a vendor, a partner to come in and help you with the implementation, or you can just buy it and have it managed, I think is an important kind of decision framework. And you need to be able to make sure that you've aligned your decisions with what's going to benefit your business the best. There's never been more decisions, more possibilities, I think is the right way to put it, than there are today. And so I think making sure that all those things align, and then making sure that the disaggregation vendor also has a strong cloud presence and a strong cloud strategy, so that you're not once again falling back to managing multiple pieces, multiple components, and multiple environments. I think all that comes together to form a real solid kind of strategy and foundational best practices.
Yeah, that's good advice, Howard. Yeah, you're right. Randy's network disaggregation journey is incredible. So I'd like to come back to him and see, what was your biggest surprise, Randy, during your network disaggregation journey?
Again, the biggest surprise was how well and it worked at the end of the day. I thought it was going to be a uphill battle the entire time. We had a lot of work to do, within a year and a half of starting this and starting our deployments, we're 140 routers out there. We don't have a huge team, so it takes a lot of time to get those out, but we're able to standardize, right? Because we're going to a one platform basically, and it's OCNOS, right? I shouldn't say we're going to one platform. We're going to one NOS. We have many different platforms that we can deploy this on, but it's always OCNOS. So when we write standards and MOPs and get those out there and documentation, we can just write it once basically, and then there's the variables of port numbering schemes or whatever that we just have to change, but really we just have to write it once, and then it applies across all the different types of boxes that we have OCNOS on. So that's one of the great advantages of doing something that's portable to a bunch of different hardware, is being able to get the densities that you need, even within the monolithic realm, depending on what platform you choose, because you're looking for certain port densities, the command structures change and the context change within the routing command line. And there's nuances and differences between the different platforms, even though they're running the same OS, right? The same NOS on those. So this one's, very strict. If you know how to do it on this box, OCNOS is the same over here as it is over here as it is over here. So that's the nice part about it. From the standardization standpoint, it really accelerated our documentation, again, because we only had to write it once. The MOPs, we only had to write it once. The wiki entries, we only have to write those once for internal engineering. So that was a great part of it. So there were several surprises out there for it. The biggest surprise that I had, though, and it had been a while since I even experienced this, is in my early career, I worked for very large cable companies, and they did a lot of business with the large router manufacturers. So when we had a bug or we had a feature request, they were right on it. And so as I kind of went through my career, finding my niche in the space, it wasn't with the large cable companies. It was more with the smaller cable companies and in mergers and acquisitions and integration and things like that. So we became less attractive as a customer because we weren't buying as much. We just didn't spend a whole lot with large manufacturers, and feature requests and bug reports became kind of, they weren't paid attention to. With IP Infusion, we were able to get, we've made 3 feature requests. All 3 have been delivered within a matter of 1 or 2 release cycles. 2 of them were multiple customers that had done feature requests, cosmetic. We had one that was our own. We wanted something called a commit confirm feature. So when you commit configuration, you can then roll it back after a certain amount of time in case something happens. You get kicked out of the box. And with our model, the closest person to actually get access to a router may be 100 miles away or more. So that's hours of having a box sitting there idle. So with that, we were able to make these feature requests, and it's tracked online. I can see updates on the feature requests. So they really just have their operation together as far as a company, right? So when we open up cases, attack cases, we log in, we open up tickets, we see the updates to the tickets. Every time they're updated, we get emails, and we can see all of our tickets in one spot. Same thing if we find a bug, right? And I hate to bring up bugs when we're talking about a product, but it's software, it's networking software. I mean, you're going to have bugs no matter which way you cut it if you have a networking product out there or a software product out there. So when we did run into things, we were able to open up cases, and they were very responsive in getting them resolved. And again, we had those resolved 1 or 2 release cycles, whether there was a maintenance or a major release. All that stuff got resolved quickly. So like I said, it'd been a while since I had that experience. So I almost felt like the belle of the ball in that situation, because it was, it was just an unbelievable experience having that much attention put on you as a customer, and having your feature requests met, having your bug reports met, tested, and then delivered with a fix. So it was, those were all surprises to me going into this, and I think the two biggest were just how much attention, how mature, at the end of the day, how mature Oknos turned out to be as a product, how familiar it was, and then being able to kind of track and have that sort of attention put on as a customer was just reassuring. So yeah, I think those are the biggest surprises.
Wow, it's our mission to make our customers feel like the belle of the ball. I like it. So we have only a couple of minutes left, and we're starting to get some questions from the audience. So I'll share the first. And actually, I would like Randy and Howard both to answer this. It's a good question, and we'll start with Randy. We got a question. Do you have any suggestions for other companies that might be on the fence to try network disaggregation?
Yeah, obviously do your homework, right? That's kind of the main thing is get in there, find a product that fits your needs, do your testing, make sure it's working. Don't make any rash decisions, but definitely do your homework and then get into testing, right? I think there's just a lot of fear. I know I had it, of the unknown, right? I'm not familiar with this. This is new. And when you're a network engineer, like big drastic changes like this, to me always equal kind of bad. Like something's going to go bad because I don't know anything about this really, and it's kind of scary, and I don't have experience with it. But get familiar with it. Talk to people. Look for media out there. So obviously AT&T went white box core. I had a chance to talk with one of the engineers that was part of that project at AT&T and ask him questions and get his feedback kind of off the record. So if you have those types of opportunities, do so. But if you're on the fence about it, it's and I'm want to hear Howard's response to this, but I think you need to really start looking seriously at disaggregated networking. I think it's something that's just, you're just kind of pushing it off in my opinion, with the way everything is going. So that'd be my advice.
Yeah, and I would echo that last sentiment for sure. I think you should be bringing it up in your lab now. Truthfully, honestly, look at your kind of currency documents, right? What is the current state, and how far out of ideal current state is the totality of your network, and see, is there some place that may be low-hanging fruit? Because the integration of disaggregated networks today is very, very high, right? So is there a place that you can start the test that is kind of low-hanging fruit, where the network equipment's old, your version of the firmware, the version of the software, the version of the OS that's running there is likely not current. Maybe you're not getting the performance that location, division, department, piece of the organization needs, and see if that would be a good place to look at a kind of getting your feet wet with some white box hardware and disaggregated networking. I wouldn't recommend trying to come out the gate and do a whole rip and replace. I think it's going to be. I don't think there's any reason you can't do it. But we tend to find our kind of appetite for risk to be less in those situations. And so what I really aim to do is find a way to create a champion within the organization and let your users talk about the success, let your users talk about the win that you provided and continue to provide for them. And the best way to do that is to pick something that's already kind of a sore spot within the organization, even if it's something that doesn't get everyone's full attention, and make that organization kind of your champion. And then, to Randy's much earlier point, you'll have demand lined up around the block as soon as you start showing success.
Oh, excellent. And perfect timing. With that, we are out of time, and I want to thank you. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Randy. You are both wealths of information. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. And we also appreciate all of our guests who have attended. So we have had a couple other questions and we'll be following up. We have also to say that we will be sharing this at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing a copy of this webinar replay. We'll also be sharing a copy of the GigaOm report with everyone. So once again, thank you, Randy. Thank you, Howard, and thank you all. And until next time, bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.